Welcome to the Shadow of World Wars channel. Be sure to subscribe the channel so that you don't miss out any video like this one. In 1914, as war erupted across Europe, young British soldiers proudly posed for the camera before shipping off to the Western Front. Their faces showed determination and excitement, but within months, many of them would come to understand the grim reality of trench warfare. A haunting image from Ypres in 1915 shows Belgian refugees trudging down a muddy road, pushing carts filled with what little they could save. Entire families were forced from their homes as shells reduced villages to rubble, turning civilians into wanderers in their own country. French troops in the Champagne region were photographed standing in waterlogged trenches, mud rising up to their knees. The men looked exhausted, their uniforms caked in dirt, yet they held their rifles tightly, determined to resist despite the misery that surrounded them. In 1917, a German soldier sat with his horse in the quiet moment before an artillery barrage. Animals carried supplies, pulled wagons, and shared the hardships of the front. Many, like the soldier's faithful companion, never made it home, sacrificed alongside their human counterparts. A rare photo captures a group of Australian troops sharing cigarettes in the Gallipoli campaign of 1915. The men laughed together despite the heat, disease, and constant danger from Turkish guns. Their camaraderie became one of the few comforts in a campaign marked by failure and suffering. An American Red Cross nurse stood beside a field hospital tent in France, 1918. Her calm presence offered hope to wounded soldiers lying on stretchers nearby. Thousands of women volunteered as nurses, often facing the same dangers as the men they treated, from shellfire to deadly influenza outbreaks. On the Italian front, soldiers were photographed climbing through the snowy Dolomite Mountains in 1916. Their breath froze in the bitter air, and avalanches killed thousands. Mountain warfare was unforgiving, yet both sides struggled desperately for control of the high passes. A powerful image shows a British soldier carrying his wounded comrade on his back through no man's land. The mud clung to their boots, the barbed wire tore at their uniforms, and enemy fire whistled overhead. Acts of courage like this were repeated countless times, often without recognition. In 1916, Canadian troops advanced through the shattered landscape of the Somme. The ground was cratered from endless shelling, trees were reduced to splinters, and the air was filled with smoke. The battle would claim more than 1 million casualties, becoming one of the bloodiest campaigns in history. A photo from Verdun shows French soldiers gathered around a small cooking fire inside a trench. Their helmets hung on the wall behind them, and steam rose from the pot as they prepared a simple meal. Even in the midst of slaughter, the men clung to moments of normal life to endure the endless fighting. Another poignant image taken in 1918 shows a group of weary soldiers resting against the ruins of a church in northern France. The stained glass windows were shattered, the roof collapsed, but the men found shelter among the sacred remains. The destruction of such places reminded everyone that nothing was safe from the war's reach. In the winter of 1915, a group of German soldiers huddled together in a dugout lit only by a lantern. Their faces were tired and hollow, the wooden walls lined with frost. This image captured the endless strain of waiting, as days turned into weeks inside the frozen earth. A striking photo shows Scottish Highland regiments marching through a ruined village, their kilts swaying as they passed by shattered stone houses. The contrast between traditional dress and the devastation of modern war created a surreal picture of a world torn apart. On the Eastern Front, Russian infantry stood in the snow, rifles at their sides, as they prepared for another offensive. Many of them lacked proper boots and winter gear, yet they pressed on through hunger and exhaustion, driven by duty and the immense pressures of the Tsar's crumbling empire. In 1917, American troops were photographed digging trenches under a gray sky shortly after their arrival in France. Their uniforms were still fresh, their expressions confident, but nearby veterans of the front looked on with somber faces, knowing what awaited the newcomers. A haunting image captures stretcher bearers carrying a wounded man across a battlefield cratered with shell holes. The ground was littered with debris, and smoke drifted in the background. These silent heroes risked their lives daily to bring the injured back from the front lines. Another rare photograph shows a German artillery crew loading a massive cannon, the barrel towering above them like an iron monster. Their uniforms were stained with soot, their movements methodical, and behind them the landscape bore the scars of relentless bombardment. In 1916, French soldiers wearing gas masks moved cautiously through a devastated forest. The twisted remains of trees surrounded them, and the eerie sight of men hidden behind masks reflected the terrifying reality of chemical warfare, a weapon that defined the Great War's cruelty. An extraordinary picture shows a group of Senegalese soldiers serving in the French army. They stood proudly with their rifles, far from their homeland, fighting in a conflict that spanned continents. Their presence was a reminder of how global the First World War truly was. Another image depicts a British officer writing a letter home inside a trench bunker. A candle flickered beside him as he leaned over a scrap of paper. Countless men wrote such letters, sometimes never knowing if their words reached their families before their own fate was sealed. A photo taken near Passchendaele reveals soldiers trudging through knee-deep mud, pulling horses and wagons that sank into the swampy ground. The battlefield had turned into a sea of muck after weeks of rain, swallowing men and animals alike in one of the most infamous struggles of the war. Elsewhere, an image shows a French soldier sharing bread with a local child in a bombed-out village. Amid destruction, small moments of kindness stood as proof that humanity still survived even in the darkest of times. In 1915, a rare photo captured German and British soldiers together during the Christmas truce. They stood in no man's land, exchanging cigarettes and shaking hands beneath a cold winter sky. For a brief moment, the guns fell silent, and humanity overshadowed the brutality of war. Another striking image shows Italian soldiers hauling artillery pieces up a mountain trail with ropes and sheer determination. The incline was so steep that mules could not pass, leaving the men to drag heavy weapons by hand. Mountain warfare tested the limits of human endurance in ways that shocked even hardened veterans. A haunting scene from the Battle of Verdun shows French soldiers advancing past heaps of rubble that were once homes and farms. Smoke drifted across the horizon, and the men marched through devastation so vast that the landscape seemed unrecognizable. On the Western Front, a photograph captures German soldiers resting inside a captured trench, their helmets stacked neatly in the corner. Their tired expressions revealed the cost of every gain, as trenches changed hands again and again with staggering losses. In 1917, a British soldier sat atop a pile of spent shell casings, staring blankly into the distance. The mountain of brass shells surrounding him told the story of relentless artillery barrages that shook the earth day and night. His expression reflected exhaustion beyond words. An extraordinary image shows women working in a munitions factory in Britain, their faces and hands stained yellow from handling explosives. They were nicknamed Canary Girls because of their appearance, a stark reminder of the risks women faced on the home front while supplying the war effort. A rare photograph taken on the Eastern Front depicts Austro-Hungarian troops building a wooden bridge across a frozen river. Their coats hung heavy with frost, and the makeshift structure creaked under the weight of carts and men. Supply lines often decided the outcome of battles, and soldiers worked tirelessly to maintain them. Another photo shows a group of British soldiers with pigeons perched on their hands. These birds carried vital messages across the front, sometimes flying through bullets and smoke to deliver words that could save entire units. In an age of modern weapons, the humble pigeon remained a lifeline. In 1916, a French officer posed with his unit in front of a dugout, their faces hardened by months of combat. Some smiled faintly, others looked solemn, but all stood together as brothers in arms. The photo preserved a moment of unity that many of them would not live to see again. A chilling image shows rows of wooden crosses rising from a makeshift cemetery near the front lines. Helmets rested atop some of the graves, marking the fallen. These fields of silence grew across Europe, becoming the final resting place for millions. One more powerful photograph captures a German soldier playing a violin beside a ruined farmhouse. Around him, comrades listened quietly, their rifles propped nearby. Music, even in war, gave soldiers a brief escape from the relentless thunder of battle. A remarkable photo from 1917 shows American troops arriving in France, their uniforms crisp and their flags held high. Crowds of civilians lined the streets to welcome them, waving and cheering as fresh soldiers entered a war that had already drained Europe of millions of lives. Another image captures German stormtroopers preparing for an assault, crouched low with grenades in their hands. Their new tactics of infiltration and speed shocked Allied defenders, changing how battles were fought during the later years of the war. In 1915, a rare photograph shows a group of French colonial troops from Morocco standing proudly in uniform. Their presence highlighted the vast reach of the conflict, as men from Africa, Asia, and beyond were drawn into Europe's war. A haunting picture depicts stretcher bearers carrying wounded soldiers through a destroyed orchard near the Marne. Branches snapped overhead, fruit trees lay splintered, and the men's heavy steps pressed through mud, thick with blood and rain. Another extraordinary image shows a German U-boat crew posing on the deck of their submarine before heading out into the Atlantic. The sea was their battlefield, and their mission to cut Allied supply lines turned the ocean into one of the deadliest arenas of the war. A rare photograph captures British pilots standing beside their fragile biplanes, leather helmets strapped tightly as they prepared to take off. Their aircraft looked like toys compared to modern machines, but these men carried the weight of air superiority on flimsy wings of fabric and wood. One striking image reveals the faces of child laborers working in a European factory, producing supplies for the war. Their small hands stitched uniforms and packed shells, a sobering reminder that even children were drawn into the machinery of global conflict. In 1916, a powerful photo shows Russian prisoners of war lined up under German guard. Their coats were torn, their eyes hollow, and many leaned on each other just to stay upright. The fate of prisoners often meant hunger, disease, and years of uncertainty. Another image captures a British chaplain holding a small service amid ruins, a Bible in his hand, and soldiers kneeling on the broken ground. Faith became a fragile anchor for men who faced death daily, and such moments brought solace amid despair. A haunting picture from the Battle of the Somme shows a lone soldier silhouetted against a sky filled with smoke, walking through a wasteland of craters and wire. His small figure against the shattered horizon spoke louder than any words about the cost of war. Elsewhere, a photo records French and British generals meeting near the front, maps spread across a table in the open air. Their serious faces reflected the constant tension of command, where every decision meant thousands of lives gained or lost. A powerful photo from 1918 shows Allied soldiers marching through the liberated streets of a French town. Civilians leaned from windows and crowded the sidewalks, showering the men with flowers as church bells rang. For many, it was the first glimpse of hope after years of occupation. Another striking image depicts German soldiers retreating across a ruined bridge, smoke rising in the distance. Their once proud army now looked weary and beaten, as exhaustion and dwindling supplies pushed them toward collapse in the final year of the war. In a poignant photograph, an American soldier sat in a quiet moment, carving his initials into the stock of his rifle. The simple act captured how men sought ways to leave their mark in a conflict that threatened to erase entire generations. A rare image shows French women working as tram conductors in Paris during 1917. With so many men at the front, women took on countless jobs once reserved for men, keeping cities functioning while balancing grief and responsibility. Another extraordinary photo captures a British tank lumbering across the battlefield for the first time in 1916. Its steel tracks tore through barbed wire and mud, symbolizing a new age of mechanized warfare that forever changed how battles would be fought. One haunting image shows rows of German soldiers lying in a field hospital, their eyes covered with bandages after exposure to mustard gas. The silent room told of pain beyond description, and many would never fully recover from their wounds. A photo from late 1918 depicts soldiers of many nations gathered together. Their uniforms different, but their relief unmistakable. The war had forged unlikely bonds among allies who might otherwise have never crossed paths. Another image reveals a group of children playing among the ruins of their destroyed village. Their laughter contrasted sharply with the devastation around them, a reminder that even amid war, the resilience of youth endured. A rare photograph captures delegates at the signing of the armistice on November 11, 1918. Papers lay on the table inside a railway carriage, and pens scratched signatures that brought an end to 4 years of unimaginable destruction. Another image taken shortly after shows soldiers embracing, some crying, others laughing, as news of peace spread across the lines. The relief etched on their faces was a universal language understood by all who had endured the Great War. One last haunting photo from the aftermath shows a vast cemetery stretching across the French countryside, white crosses in endless rows. Each marker told of a life cut short, and together they formed a landscape of sacrifice that would shape the memory of the 20th century. Thanks for watching the video. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe the channel for more unforgotten visuals from World Wars.